Good morning. How are y'all today? I feel like every time I come in here, the class is thinning out more and more. Hopefully, you saw that I posted the lecture from the conversation with Ben from last week, and that is now up on Canvas. And there's even kind of my lead into that as a separate video. So I'm trying to record those together and then separate them out. So it usually takes me a day to kind of go back and edit. Um, I like seeing this activity on the Miro board. This is actually a pretty fun way of having things kind of develop. So you're kind of seeing here, you're seeing kind of cursors float around and everything else. And again, it's giving us some opportunities to kind of look into the silos of what people are working on. I could see cohorts are keeping up, some that are kind of falling behind, but it's a nice way of kind of knowing where you stand with the workflow. I did go through the mission statements last night and just kind of read through them. And some of them can be crafted and refined a little bit further. When you go to your cohorts today, I want you to say the things that you've written. Okay, so to actually say them to your groups, that's the first thing that I want you to do. There's something about publicly making a statement. And what I want you to remember about your mission statement is, first of all, it should be true, right? You should narrow down what it is that you're trying to do with your efforts and your energy as an artist, a creator, a communicator. Okay. The second thing is that I guess I would ask the question, how many of you struggle writing a mission statement? All right. So it happens for usually one of two reasons. First is you don't have clarity of project and outcome. Okay. So you're still working through that. And what we're working towards next week is to really try to figure out what a prototype might look like for your project, right? So prototype is a big word, but it doesn't have to be overly intimidating or a huge lift. I mean, you're going to put the effort in that it requires, but it's not a finished anything. It's how fast can you get to some proof of concept as quickly as you possibly can. All right. So I'll give you an example here, and this might seem a little bit odd at university, but I'm working on a bourbon label right now, okay, for a bottle. And my sketchbook probably looks a lot like your sketchbook. I've got ideas, I've got words, I've got things I'm kind of working through, and I've got my process for how this may actually work. Okay. So a few initial concepts. I start thinking about the limitations of the bottle, the project, how it's being presented. And at some point, it's like I'm thinking about a two-sided label, right? Well, the moment it goes into a three-dimensional space, I fall apart. I can do pictures, but making things is kind of another step for me. So something as simple as this, which is cutting something out with paper and working on both sides lets me start to understand as a prototype, is this going to actually function and work, right? So it's theoretical on the page, it's all of a sudden real. So your prototypes can be something as simple as that. It can be that you've taken your note cards and you put them into the binding of a sketchbook. Those things are steps I'm going to walk you through today, just to kind of give you a little bit more in-depth review of what those steps and that kind of idea catcher process looks like. All right. So that is the first thing. I'm going to give you just a real quick update on the case study, the print company. No updates this week. Trying to get down to meet with the printers and just coordinate schedules proved really difficult. My next step is to actually block in an outline for deadlines. All right. So time is an amazing constraint, and I am using the pressure of this class and the footprint we have here, just like you do. I want to launch no later than the date that I'm asking you to launch. So again, it's in parallel. If you struggle, and you will when you're making things and you're crafting things in your own studio, and certainly outside the schedule and expectations of a classroom, it's really hard to hold yourselves accountable, right? You make promises to yourself, you miss deadlines. There's all sorts of things that happen. What can we do in order to kind of work through that process? What can make us more reliable in our own practice, right? So maybe the default answer is, well, you just become more disciplined, right? Self-discipline. That's what we just have to work harder, make up our minds, and get it done. Well, that is a failing system too. All right. Maybe you're one of the few who's consistently self-disciplined and it works really well for you. Congratulations, but you are kind of the anomaly, not the rule. All right. So what I've found over the years is that anytime I can outsource accountability, it becomes much easier to deliver on things. So as an example, if I want to have a solo exhibition at a gallery, I spent years trying to figure out what I was going to paint, how big they were going to be, what the content was going to be. And then I finally put a pitch together and I went to a gallery, convinced them to give me a show. And now it's like, okay, 1 year out, I have to produce the work. So for me, public humiliation was kind of a great motivator, right? But I just wanted to show my best work. And all of a sudden I set to task and I planned my show and I had an idea for the space from the gallery. I walked there. I actually physically went to the space, walked around and said, okay, the light's coming in this time of day. Here's the door. There's a back wall. There's about 40 feet of space on this side of the gallery. There's 30 feet on the other side. There's an alcove here I have to work around. And all of a sudden I could start to think about visualizing my work in that space. All right. Morning. Unlike, not unlike that, with this particular label I designed, I ended up going to the ABC store. Again, maybe not university kind of standard content here, but I had to go look and see what else was out there. So there's going to be always this idea that if you can go to a location, you can talk to people, you can see things physically, it's a lot easier to visualize what it is that you're actually trying to produce. So the whole point of your prototype is to actually create something where you've convinced yourself that this is worth pursuing and you're sharing it with other people to say, hey, this is my idea. And it should be an immediate read. Does that make sense? All right. So prototype, if you look on the syllabus, that's the next thing that we're working on. And again, I know that we missed kind of meeting with our cohorts last week because of the interview and the engagement, but I hope that you were able to kind of touch base with everybody else on that. I did ask you to put together a bit of a vision board, and thank you for doing that. I'm going to just quickly scroll through some of this here. And again, see cohort 1, you've got some kind of catching up to do, but this is what we want. We want, so Tate, well done here. You're starting to grab some different reference points. I'm always a big fan of text, right? If you can go out and to find source material that describes things, like it's not just pictures, but words. I gave you the example when Ben was here last week of, basically showed you his entire resume, right? Those of you who want to be a painter, go find painters who are having the career that you want. And almost always they'll have a chronological listing of the shows that they've had. And you say, oh, they started here with a student show. Just like Ben's, you could see that his first show was the Anderson Gallery. And then he got into the Society of Illustrators. You might say, well, what's the Society of Illustrators? And he's up here telling you, like, it was a really big deal for me. They had a scholarship. It was kind of national exposure. Don't you think you should know what the Society of Illustrators is? All right. So those are the keys for you as you start to kind of unpack these things and use them as your blueprint in the development of your own products, careers, and everything else. Make sense? All right. So as I kind of go through here, you guys make sure that these things are updated. I love when, Caitlin, you're going through and you're dropping in a field color here and you kind of organize those things. I'm just doing this as a quick overview and assessment. But this is also a great place for you all to look into these things too. Say, that's super interesting. Who's that artist? You've got information. You're working really collectively here to aggregate resources that should help you in your careers. Okay, that's why we bring people in. Like, how'd you do it? How'd you figure this stuff out? And did you feel a connection when Ben was talking? He's like, oh yeah, VCU grad, traveled the world. How many of you left here saying, that's pretty amazing. I would love to figure out how to do that. Anybody? I'd like to figure out how to do that. It's hard with a family, but that's pretty amazing thing, right? So that's what we want from this. Today, we have the founder of CEO. Sahil's going to join us at 10 o'clock via Zoom. And I want to ask him the same thing. Here's a guy who went out and decided that he wanted to build a billion-dollar company. I want to know what makes somebody dream that big. Where did he start? What's he doing now? What's the story in between, right? So I get really interested and compelled by foundation stories. And when people author things, that's a word that I want you to really think about. I want you to give yourselves permission to author, all right? And I'm not talking about just writing, capital A author. You're authoring opportunities, you're authoring ideas, you're bringing them into the world. All right. So take a look at Miro board. Stay updated. Again, I'm not going through all of these today. But they are there for you to look at. If you do not have these things posted, then you're behind, and go ahead and get those things posted, okay? The anatomy of a problem. So when I started working out, everything that I did was working for somebody else. All right. And by the way, there are 4 essays up posted today with videos. Please read them if you can. At the very least, watch through the videos, and that's kind of a good summary of what's in them. There's a lot of content, I know. I don't have time to do them all as lectures, so hopefully there's just context in there for you with the things that we're talking about. When I started working as an illustrator, there were existing silos. There were people that I identified that I wanted to work with. Top of the list, Rolling Stone magazine. That was my dream client. That was the best of the best as far as editorial illustration. All of my heroes, that's who they worked for, and some of the most creative work was coming out of Rolling Stone magazine. I had no blueprint on how to do that. And growing up as, the son of a businessman, my dad always said, go meet people, go talk to people. Like, well, they're up in New York and I'm down in Richmond. I don't even know how that happens. There was no blueprint for that. So the very first time that I went to New York and I decided that that's where I had to be, it was a trip. And I went up with a couple of my friends who were older than me, and they were really setting up appointments and figuring out how to meet with art directors. I went up there without a cell phone, without any appointment set up, and we were there for the week. We stayed with our buddy and we actually took the train back and forth from Stamford, Connecticut. All right. So not really any cost other than getting up there. And every day they had a schedule. They went out, they set up these appointments, they'd go meet with people, and they'd come back and they'd tell me about these amazing conversations they had and these new opportunities they had. Right. Well, I tried to set up all my appointments from a payphone in Times Square. And as you can imagine, I sat and waited by the payphone and it never rang. It was a pretty sad story, sad sterling, right? So I wasted my whole week. I actually left really embarrassed and decided, like, on the way back home that I was going to figure out from what they did and what I observed from my own failures, how to kind of get in and meet with people. And I went on to kind of set up this entire thing for my next trip. And I probably had 15 appointments the second trip. I got to meet with the art directors from Rolling Stone. That's another story for another day. My point to that is that we have a lot to learn from our failures. But had I never taken that first trip to New York and failed and found a way of kind of outsourcing accountability and connecting with people who had already done this, I couldn't have just figured it out. So you have to kind of jump in with both feet. That's a big part of it. So let me fast forward to kind of where you are right now and why I want to talk about the anatomy of a problem. When you work for businesses, they look at problems as projects. Right? I'm going to repeat that. Working for companies, they look at problems as projects. Those people who can solve problems have higher value in companies, right? They get higher salaries, they get higher rates. Those are people who consistently deliver and make it easier for the company to function. Now, a company at its best is efficient. Its lifeblood is commerce. So they want to be more efficient. They want to generate more revenue. And there's all sorts of different business types. Some are purely profit driven. Some are socially driven. And there's everything in between. So before you write out companies and businesses and commerce, understand that if you build a business of your own, you get to set the rules as to what makes that company tick. But at its lifeblood, again, you have to be profitable. Okay? So the anatomy of a problem goes something like this. When you get a project, your first project as an illustrator, a designer, you're working for somebody else, it's generally going to come at you in this type of format. And this is kind of an approximation or really an aggregate of a lot of different emails I've gotten. Dear Sterling, my name is Eric. I'm the art director from wherever. I followed your work for some time and I have a project that I think you'd be perfect for. The article is about a young man on an adventure across the Delta Plains. All that's made up, right? He does this, then this, then this. We're looking for a full-page illustration for the November issue. Sketches would need to be submitted by a certain date, with final artwork due on a certain date. I'm including a couple of samples of your work that I feel would serve as a great approach for the project. If you're interested and available, please let me know. Happy to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Okay, I get this email, check my phone. I'm on the road. I'm at my son's baseball game, usually not checking the email there. But as an example, I'm not home. I don't know if my schedule will allow for the project. What's the first thing you should do? You're brilliant. That's exactly right. Okay. So you reply as fast as you can. Like, who's on the other end? You've got an art director or creative director who has a stress, who has a pressure, right? That's not the only job they're assigning. That's one of maybe 40. or 20 or whatever it is. They've got all these things going on. If they don't hear back from you, what's going to happen? They're going to move on. So expedience and communication is really important, right? So we're not saying, yes, I'm doing the job. An easy response is, hey, thanks so much for thinking about me. I'm not at home. I'll get back to you as soon as I get there. That's a placeholder, right? That's a little stress removed from your collaborator's work on the other side. Does that make sense? Like, I got this. Okay. Now you go back and you have an opportunity to kind of go review the project. Okay. I'm looking at my deadlines. I can commit to this because I don't have other things going on, or I can handle the work. I'm not traveling, right? So you have your time frame. So that is a core component in the anatomy of a problem, time, right? We have a lot of different artists in here with different backgrounds and different interests here. I meant to start my timer. And it's really important that you understand that time is universal. I've worked with dancers on this stage, and they think about time a lot different than those of you who want to be animators. Time is different for an illustrator, or a designer, or a gallery painter. What are you talking about? Well, illustration and design oftentimes is something that is seeking people's attention, right? It's not something they've sought out. We are actually trying to interject our images, our pictures to grab someone's attention, the turn of a page, a book cover, a billboard. So these are things that are really pining for people's attention. You go to a show for a painting, for a painter, you have time. You've chosen to use your time. You've gone out of your way to go see something. So the function, the basic function of those two things, fine art and applied art, is just different, right? So we think about a billboard as an example, and someone's flying by it at 60 miles per hour. You have a moment to catch their attention versus a book cover, maybe a little bit longer, right? We think about comic books, the way that they're sold, the way they're read, the way we consume things is an element of time too. So I use the term time to deliberately kind of cut across different silos, certainly in communication arts, but you don't think that a surgeon down at the hospital understands time, right? Or somebody who's scheduling programming or speakers understands. Everyone understands that time is important. So what's the most obvious time component that we can control, or that's associated with any type of problem? How you manage it. So let's put another term that you know, deadline. Okay. So back to the outsourcing opportunities, outsourcing accountability. If you can attach your timeline to an external timeline, that it gives you a kind of public pressure that can be very beneficial to you, right? So I've got that show, it's in a year. I don't want to let people down. I'm going to do my best work. I'll start working on it. I'm not going to delay, right? I've been hired for a project. They need it by this date and this date. And if I don't deliver, then I've let my client down, right? Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's that you're not going to get paid is enough. So you have to decide what your motivators are with these things. But for me personally, that outsourcing accountability is a very helpful thing, all right? So the second part of this, as we kind of break this down, we start to think about the limitations of space. So same examples up on the stage. The dancers think about the stage completely differently than a designer thinks about a page in a book, right? Your screens, your animation work, something that's going to show as a feature film, that space component, the proportions, is going to be quite different than somebody else in a different trade. That's also an element that everybody from every other industry is going to understand. Where do you do your work? How is it being seen? How is it being shown? How do you promote and market it? Yes. Yeah, so all of these are other terms. So we might say proportions. Like, so if you're a designer and someone comes to you and says, I have this deadline and I have this type of proportion or dimension or function. So oftentimes in illustration design, the function of the work is going to dictate the size. Okay, so the size might be, as an example, for a magazine, 8.5 by 11 inches. We need it 300 DPI, CMYK file. All those things are kind of built into it. If you are working with screen resolution, the proportions are going to be your size, and you're going to have your the actual size of the file and everything else, the resolution. Sure. But the reason I leave it open-ended is, again, I want this to be applicable to other industries as you start to talk to people. And they're going to say, okay, the space on the stage, if you are designing the choreography for dancers, you're limited to how deep the stage is and how wide it is and how people are seeing it, right? For someone who's making a movie, I'll give you a visual example. The director's doing this, right? That's the limitations of the proportions that they're thinking about. How do I want to frame this? So that's where we're talking about space with all of this. If you go into a gallery, your square footage, how big are the walls? Space. Does that help a little bit? Great. All right. So the third component, as we get into this, is we are looking for a full-page illustration. November issue sketches would need to be submitted on this date. This is an article about a young man on adventure across the Delta Plains. Okay, what is that? That's the story. That's the content. That's the stuff. Okay? And it's our job, oftentimes in visual communication, to take these words, to create pictures, and communicate the story out to people as impactfully, as interestingly, or as quickly as possible, right? Or as clearly as possible. So that's really what we get into in communication arts oftentimes is we're relaying a message that was words, we're converting into pictures, and we're connecting with people oftentimes much quicker and more efficiently than words do. Words take time to read and process. A picture is worth 1,000 words. You've heard that before. Does that make sense? All right. So all of these things together, we start to think about also who wrote you. And it's kind of built into the header here. We get kind of our industry kind of baked into it. So, hi, I'm so-and-so at this magazine. You know you're working for editorial. Hi, I'm an art director at a book company. You're working in publishing. Hi, I'm a creative director at an ad agency. You're working with advertising. So these things are kind of built into it, and each comes with its own set of rules and standards that you're now working within. Okay, so those are kind of the big chunks, the big pieces. And then, of course, that company, that organization, that institution, that person wants to relay that message to who? To their audience, right? So let's simplify all of this. You're taking a story and you're communicating to an audience. And it's within these limitations of time, space, industry, audience, and content that we often work as creators. And so those things have almost universally always been true. Now, let me give you an example where things get difficult. And this is where you are as students. Take one away. You don't have a deadline. You're probably not going to be very productive, right? You don't have anyone tell you whether it's a vertical or horizontal, so the space is not determined. Even harder. You don't have anybody telling you what the story is. Content, that's the hardest one, right? And you certainly don't know who you're speaking to. So building this, we can look to commerce, we can look to business and say, you know what? They've figured out how to efficiently work with creative processes and pipelines to deliver things on the other end, right? You go work for Pixar, you don't think that they have a workflow in the pipeline to get things from idea to the screen. Of course they do. So we can look at these as case studies to figure out how we get our messaging out, how we actually build our projects. So if you're ever stuck, I use what's called a three-sided model, and it's basically time, content, and space on three sides. I'll share this in Canvas with you, and we are trying to figure out how to get that message out to the audience, right? So it's there's a term that you may or may not know. It's called a shaped charge. Does anyone know what a shaped charge is? Right? It's a controlled explosion. Okay, so I'll give you kind of a grim visualization here. We won't go too far into it, but you've got a small firecracker. We'll say it's very small, and it's in your hand. Your hand's open, it goes off. It might hurt a little bit. If your hand's closed, you're going to the emergency room. Okay, so that conical explosion, that shaped charge that we're talking about is what we're trying to actually create through these limitations. Now, one of the great misconceptions about art is like, you can do anything. It's wide open. Make whatever you want. And that's what makes it seem like, oh, you're an artist, that's fun. Would you do this thing for free? You know, would you paint my baby's portrait? Would She designed my website. Like, no, this is my trade. This is what I do, right? So the constraints of professional requirements are actually a very, very healthy thing. And you can learn to leverage those things in the development of your project. So I've given you one, right? I've given you two really so far. And you're struggling with what? It's not with the deadline. That's the time component, right? The content. Every one of you is probably struggling with, what do I make? Who's it for? Why am I making it? Every business owner in the world addresses those problems. So you're not unique as artists in that. What is someone going to care about? All right. So Sahil is going to talk today. I've been reading his book, listening to a lot of his interviews, and I'll let him say it in his own words, but the paraphrase is that he solves a problem for himself first. What do I want to do? What do I want to make? What problems do I have? What stressors are here? Now, he is, I believe that he's a painter and a drawer as well as other things, but he ended up coding and building Gumroad because he wanted to sell an icon. He said, well, if I can figure out how to do this for myself, then I can figure out how to scale this up for other people. Okay? So the great thing is that anything that you see that's been made has a process for having made it, right? So you can go through and say, there's vendors for all sorts of things that you all collect, that you buy, that you use. And if someone's doing that, you can probably find someone locally who can fabricate things, who can produce things. So you don't have to go out and actually pour the epoxy resin for a pen, right? You can actually have someone make those things. Does that make sense? So that's part of your research. And once you figure out who you want to communicate to, and you work backwards, what are you trying to say to them? It becomes a lot easier to actually build your project and have an idea for something you want to make. All right. Does that make sense? So the cool thing about this is a pretty universal email. What's missing in here? Okay. So you've replied, I'll get back to you. I'm away from my desk right now, away from my studio. You get back as soon as you can and let them know that, hey, I'm interested. Can we jump on a call? Phone call, Zoom. I like Zoom a little bit better just because I see a face, they see a face, another human connection, right? Phone calls are fine, but Zoom is a little bit better. If they're local in person, I will absolutely do everything I can to go meet them. Okay, every time I do that, I learn so much more. I build a deeper relationship. And you'll hear me keep talking about these things in business relationships. Like, it's business. It's all about money. No, it's all about people having trust in you and you having trust in them. They see something that you're making or creating that has value, and it can help them in their own ambitions. It's a relationship, just like any other. All right. The only difference is there's a commerce piece to it. You want to see things get really complicated, like I'm doing with my brother here? Bring commerce into those family relationships. Bring commerce into friend relationships, right? Nothing will ruin your relationships with people you care about faster than that. So how do we avoid that? How do we avoid those things that could be potential points of conflict? Even with your family, you set up a contract. Okay? My brother and I will have a contract. It will be less businessy. It'll be general terms. But most importantly, predict that things will go wrong. Okay? You want to have an exit plan. If we don't get along and I'm doing the work or he's doing the work and I'm not carrying the load, there's going to be a buyout. There's going to be an easy way for me to get the shares that he has and vice versa. There's going to be an exit strategy. I learned this the hard way through doing different businesses. But from the beginning, have an exit strategy. Assume that things will go wrong. It will save your relationships. One really easy way to do this, let's say that, again, you came back and said, Professor Hundley, I want to be the greatest artist who ever lived. And we kind of start to work that maze backwards. I think about your spindling ambition going out as big as you can. And then we start to set things up in phases. Okay, if that's phase 4, what has to happen in phase 3 and then phase 2? And before you know it, phase 1 is like, I'm sitting in class, I got to get good grades, I have to make a portfolio, I have to do these things. And it's incremental steps to get to the bigger and bigger things, right? So if you have a plan and you have someone you want to do business with, every one of those phases is a point of exit. Okay, we got here. This is a checkpoint. We didn't hit the marks. Let's find a way to kind of get out of this. Wouldn't you rather have that conversation, bless you, now before things like right now, it's all made up, right? There's nothing real. We haven't made any money. The moment money comes into this, it's like it gets very real and it can get very contentious.
Anyone is extremely resistant to having that kind of a conversation on the front end. Anybody who's extremely resistant to putting terms down in writing, somebody you should think really hard about partnering with in any capacity in life.
Yes.
Because I've also had many experiences where I was partnering with somebody, wanted to work that stuff out more explicitly. They were like, no, we don't have to worry about that. That's not a big deal. On the back end, that almost always bites you in the ass.
Yeah.
Every time. And every time I work with somebody who is excited to scope it out and get really clear about the expectations, those are the greatest relationships. Things don't listen.
So just saying it for the recording, Chance was just saying that, any relationship that you go into, like having that contract is always important because it almost always goes south. I'm doing a bad job paraphrasing, but it's a protection. So remember that your contract, what is a contract? Well, it's designed to protect both parties. It should favor both parties. Now, something was happening early in my career when I was getting contracts from all these big publishers that I wanted to work for, and it was all rights buyout, in any media that exists or will be discovered, universal rights, right? Work for hire. So those are things. I'm not saying never do those things. I went to my second agent and said, I don't do work for hire. And he goes, well, what if a project comes along and pays you $20,000? Like, well, then I think about it. So, but what does work for hire mean? Anybody know what work for hire means? Most entertainment companies have kind of a work for hire equivalent. Work for hire means they own everything. Like literally, like everything you do, they will own it, right? Most companies will default to a work for hire, evil empire, right? No, they're just trying to protect themselves as well as they can, and they're going to ask for what they can get. So contracts are negotiable. They should be negotiable. You have permission to go through them and redline, mark things out, put in your own words, and send it back. It's a dialogue. You're more reticent to do that when you're starting out, but the more you see certain things, and that's why I want to give you some language to think about, the easier it gets. And you realize, like, first of all, usually in a true business situation, the people you're working with, they don't have a personal investment in the money that they're offering you, right? They have a budget. The company they work for has money that they're putting out because they have an audience, they have a product they're developing, they see value in what you do, and it's your job to kind of help them get these things to market in front of people, right? So you're part of that. So when you ask somebody for changes in the contract, sometimes it'll go to the legal department. Let's check on this, right? If it's an individual that is not a business entity or hasn't done things before, that's where things can get a little bit bristly. They might say, well, I don't know. What does that mean? What do those words mean? Keep it simple, right? Understand that, okay, we don't want to throw words like work for hire in there if we don't have to, right? Universal rights, what does it mean? What does it sound like it means? Everywhere, universally, right? In a planetary sense, as well as in a just global sense of anywhere that they want to use it, okay? In any media that exists or will be discovered. So that language was there pre-AI, okay? AI is a new technology, and new technologies will continue to come. So in any media that exists or will be discovered, if you give that over, it's not just on the book that you're publishing. Now it's online. It's AI training models, if that's where they decide to go with it, wherever it ends up. Who knows? Okay. And all of a sudden you don't have to imagine that much. That's not that far away, right? So great point. Does that all make sense? These are things that you kind of want to watch out for as we get into it. We'll go through an actual contract in this class. I know that you're super excited about that, but I will share a mock contract, and we're going to break up into cohorts, and you're going to come back and you're going to kind of talk about what do you think that means, Okay, so you're going to read legalese and you're going to be translating that back, and we'll have a fun conversation about it. It'll actually be more fun than you think. So, all right, so this is the framework of kind of what I want you to think about. If you go through this lesson online, I break down each thing. Industry is who you're working for, audience is who you're speaking to, time is when you were saying it. There's other elements of time too that get factored in. Space is where you were saying it, and then content is what you were saying. Okay, so these are the building blocks of things as you go through. All right, any questions on that at all? Make sense? Let me see if I got this.
Momentum.
Yes.
Get to the project or product faster.
And my point with asking, like, if you took things away and you start thinking about like the content piece or anything else, you stagnate, right? But as you start to put these things on, I think about it kind of like the banks of a river, where things start to move faster and compress, and they're forced forward versus kind of just sitting still. Okay, thank you, Chance. This article is about creative performance and really flow. There's a lot of information out there on flow state now, but a lot of this has to do with distractions, putting yourself in the right mindset. And most importantly, the analogy that I would give you is if you were writing and you had to write a story, it was just really an autobiography. This is a story of your life. You could probably sit down and just bang it out, right? You know your story better than anybody else. Now you have to do a research paper on something you've never studied before. That is not flow, right? You have to go find information, you come back, you write a little bit, you go get more research done, you go back. That is kind of what happens for a lot of you in your creative practice. You start to draw things, you start to make things, but you don't know enough about the topic. Research is an absolutely critical part of flow state. And if you want your work to be easier and more fluid, then do your research, do it up front. I love living research. I love going to places and seeing things because there's so much that just gets ingrained in you from that experience. So that's really what this article is about. And once you have enough information, you have to remember that ideas, you know, if you come in with very little research and you know very little about things, you only have a couple potential points of connection. If you know a lot about things, you have many points of potential connection, and ideas speed up. It gets faster. The older you are, up to a certain point, the more quickly ideas will come to you. It becomes a very natural thing for you versus right now, oftentimes things are very difficult to generate ideas. Like, where do I start? Go research something, go somewhere, find a problem, see if you can solve it. All right. So I encourage you to read that. And then this is really kind of the nuts and bolts of this idea catcher. If you're looking for more information on how to use these things, right now, a lot of you, it looks like you've kind of got those initial thoughts. You've got things kind of laid out on the page. So what I want you doing as a conclusion to this project this week, I want you to start building piles. And these piles are really associations. So I talked to you about a catch-all, this thing where all of your ideas go in. At some point, you're going to have so many things, stories for comic books and paintings and video games and whatever it is, that your catch-all is going to fill up, and you need to take stock of your ideas. So take them out, lay them on a table. You've done some of that. And now you want to start making connections. Like, oh, this thing that I thought was a character for a comic book, it was actually a really interesting thing for a children's book. And you'll take everything connected to your children's book and you start to put these piles together. Those associations start to build your story. It starts to build the solutions to your problem, right? Again, those go into their own note card container. And each one of those is a project you can choose to pick up on its own timeline. It's just a way of sorting this mess that I know that a lot of you deal with, that I deal with. Just too many ideas. And I want to close some tabs. All right. So this is just more in-depth way of talking about how you can sort those things out. And then in the video, I think I kind of go through and actually show those steps. So you can read this, you can watch the video. I don't care either way. Mapping there, that's also something we've referenced already. So anyways, those are things. So complete steps 3 and 4 to this process. And then the last thing I kind of want you to think about, this is step 5, supposed to be filing. So all those things are there. So it just walks you through the conclusion of that. And then the next step is the prototyping stage. If I figured out. Anyways, Something's out of sequence here. I'll get that up. Step 5 is we kind of start to prototype. And as I mentioned, I showed you the first day prototyping is we're going to just try to give this thing a body, give your ideas a body. What structure, what form. It can be something as simple as that. It can be your sketchbook where you've taken your story for your comic idea and you've taken your note cards and you've pasted them in place. There is a bit of software that I use that I really like, and I'm certain that's in here somewhere. It's called Scrivener. Has anyone used Scrivener before? Anyone heard of it? So it was created by a writer for writers. And as I told you, this note card system, it is something I've developed, but it's from note card processes that writers use all the time, right? So high points, keyframes, things that are important to your storytelling. You're going to hit those points, and those are kind of the easy things. You can kind of visualize what's happening in your story and your project, and it's all this stuff in between that gets really difficult. Well, Scrivener is built around a note card system, right? So when I was writing my book, I was going through and I had dozens and dozens of pages of Word documents. And it's really hard to kind of organize those things and keep track of them. Well, Scrivener presents a way of kind of taking note card ideas with stories, story elements, and you can move them around as much as you want. So this plays right into it, and it's a very, very useful piece of software. Yes. Scrivener, Scrivener. IV as in Virginia, ENER. And I know I've got the link in one of these posts. So yeah. Yes. Yes, it is. It is. I will tell you all that the question was, is this a paid subscription for Scrivener? I don't think it's subscription. I think it's a one-time, like it might be $100. I would be shocked if they didn't have a student discount. So remember that there's educational discounts on most software these days. I get to benefit because I'm professor and I've remained a professor. You're a student. You're not going to be a student. But if you want to test things out and find them, I would first try to see if they actually have that. But look at samples online. I'm happy to give you a demo of it too, if you all want to see kind of how it works. I don't have it pulled up today. This is not my computer, but I'm happy to show you all that. Would that be helpful? Want to see it? Okay. I'll work that into one of the sessions here. All right. So that is kind of the high level stuff. Just advice again on how to find flow. I try to present big picture ideas and then go into more description with the writing, and then the videos go even more into details on how those things work. Okay. All right. So what I'm looking for next week when we come back is you should have finished kind of this initial idea catcher process, and I want to see your initial prototypes, right? So we can get those first things done. We're going to be kind of working to refine those things and kind of pushing towards really the extraction of information. What would be called your MVP, your minimum viable product? What's the least amount of effort with the maximum return? And that's really kind of over the horizon for what we're doing there. All right. Any questions on this at all? All right. Timing's good. We're going to take a quick break here. Sahil is going to join us at 10. We should have time afterwards. We'll see how long it goes. Again, I don't want to interrupt the guest speakers when they're here. And if they want to sit with us longer, we'll go longer. If you all want to kind of meet with your cohorts a little bit in here and just start sussing some things out, that's not a bad idea. The plan is to have about 30 minutes next door after we're done. Hopefully that holds true to schedule. I've got an ambitious schedule in this class, so we'll see. All right. Related questions, updates, any discoveries, any resources that you all have at all, anything that's going on that's kind of newsworthy in your lives? All right. No one wants to talk in front of the lecture class. Ann, what you got?
Finally acquired some cool panelists, and one of them is Dash Shaw, who's a comic artist working. He's done a lot of work with making his own like graphic novels, and he's also made like his own animated film feature length. But he's also worked with some big companies. I think he's worked with not quite sure. I don't really remember the details, but I will be posting like a kind of like suggestions and questions thread in the communication arts Discord for that panel that he's hosting later on. So
Congratulations. Dash Shaw is a great guest to bring in. And so that's the Richmond Indie Comic Festival, you said. Expo. And where is that taking place?
uh,
So VCU Commons, November 2nd. I want to give you an example of how my mind works. Okay, so, and the first thing that you had to do, okay, you were appointed this position, you're overseeing this. What's the very first thing that you had to secure? Venue. What does that equate to in that, anatomy of a problem? Space. Okay. That's almost always the first thing. Where is it happening? The second thing is it goes together with space. The date, right? So you had to secure the venue on a date. So that's time and space. So see how that kind of works. And now content, like who's coming? What's the show going to be? Who are we speaking to? Well, you brought in Dash Shaw to speak to other comic creators. Does that make sense? So we know exactly who we're talking to. We know the industry. We know the time, the space, the venues. Start looking at things like that. When I launched my company Legendeer, it's like, where are we going? It's like we had to make a decision. We could go anywhere in the world. I said Yosemite. Okay, so we were going to Yosemite. I was like, okay, when are we going? Had to secure housing and venues and all these other things. But it always starts kind of where are you going? Who are you speaking to? What's the message, the date, and everything else. So think about that with your project and start to work backwards a little bit. But the number one piece for all of you is who are you speaking to and what are you saying to them or what are you selling to them? Okay. All right. Please be back in here 5 minutes early so we're not kind of moving through as we kind of turn on and bring the speaker in. But see you in a few. Okay. Thank you.